I have the pleasure to have today a good friend of mine. His name is Betschel, who is the staff clinical immunologist and allergist at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. He's also assistant professor of medicine at University of Toronto and president of CHAEN, the Canadian Hereditary Angioedema Network. Dr. Betschel, thank you for being here with us today. I know that you'll be talking about three topics. One of them is going to be the new Canadian registry. Also, you'll be touching up on the research aspect of things. And finally, the guidelines that CHAEN is working on. So the floor is yours, my friend. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Charles. It's an absolute pleasure to be asked again to this meeting to present the initiatives for the Canadian hereditary angioedema over the next year. So a little bit about CHAEN. Many of you who've been to the meeting before are aware, but some may be new. It is an organization that goes back a number of years. The idea of it was from my mentor, Tom Bowen, and it is a network and an organization of physicians who treat or are interested in hereditary angioedema. It's incorporated under the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. The vision of CHAEN is really to enable patients with HAE in Canada to receive appropriate support and care so that they're able to live their lives to the fullest. And the mission of CHAEN is to unite physicians committed to ensuring all HAE patients in Canada have access to excellent care that reflects the current management and treatment guidelines and works to promote research and education as well. So I have a volunteer board of directors. I have the honor and privilege of serving as chair, and I have for a number of years. Susan Wasserman, who's at McMaster University in Hamilton, is treasurer. Gina LaQuesta is in Halifax. Dalhousie is serving as secretary. Rosita Barisi Massey is in Ontario, in Queens, and in London. Hugo Chapdelain, who's in Montreal. Dawn Goodyear is a new addition to our board of directors, and she is based in Calgary. Christina Kalazinski in Winnipeg, Amin Kanani in Vancouver, and Paul Keith in Hamilton. So you can see our board of directors is quite varied in terms of geography. I do want to send out a special thank you to Jacques Hébert. Jacques Hébert has been instrumental in my development in HAE immune deficiency. He has contributed so much to patients with HAE over the years, and he did step down this year from the board of directors, and Dawn Goodyear has been kind enough to fill his place. Again, I also want to thank our sponsors, CSL Behring Takeda, as well as more recently BioCryst. With their generous support, we're able to continue with the initiatives that are so close to our hearts. So CHAEN has clearly grown. When we first incorporated, I believe there were 33 members. We're now up 58, spanning essentially all the provinces. PEI, there's a bit of a gap, and we still don't have members up in the territories, but we are continuing to grow, and that's very important to maintain that momentum. CHAEN, though, does ride on the coattails of those who've come before us. And I want to go back, Canadian contributions to HAE. And again, I do this, many of you may know this, but when we go internationally, and I understand people internationally may be joining this meeting, the understanding that Canadian contributions to HAE, I think, is important. And it goes back to William Osler back in 1888, when he really did describe the family association of swelling and angioedema, and is credited for this initial discovery. Another major contribution that's often overlooked is from Dr. Spalding, and he practiced here in Toronto at the Toronto General Hospital and published this paper back in the 1960s. And it was the first paper to really characterize the treatment of HAE using androgens, and they showed some improvement. Again, very interesting. They suggested using androgens because they thought it would help block histamine. They had the right idea, but for the wrong reason. It did show some improvement. He was very important in this publication because he suggests that we need to move away from the term angioneurotic edema and focus on the edema part, not the angioneurotic, which related more to nerves innervating the blood vessels. But around that time, there had a strong psychiatric connotation. So he had a very strong contribution to this area, but often overlooked. Karen Binkley, who I'm fortunate enough to work with here at St. Michael's, along with Konrad Bork in Germany, published almost simultaneously the first characterization of patients with HAE normal, or as we now refer to as HAE type 3, and there have been characterization internationally of multiple variants that can confer this type of HAE. Francois Marceau in Quebec, very significant contributions to understanding the pathophysiology behind bradykinin and its contribution to angioedema. So Canada has very strong background building into this. CHAEN just continues on that very strong trajectory. And as Charles alluded to, what I do want to talk about is some of the work that CHAEN has been doing. It is divided into committees: the Guidelines Committee, a Research Committee, and the Laboratory Committee specifically. Now, what about the guidelines? So guidelines in Canada go back to 2003. So 2 decades ago, the first guideline meeting was convened by Tom Bowen. It was his idea to bring together people internationally, and it all stemmed from him having a patient and not knowing much about HAE. And Tom, being Tom, got on the phone and communicated with people to bring people together to really come up with a consensus statement to understand the diagnosis and treatment options for patients with HAE. Since that time, there have been numerous publications, both Canadian iterations, Canadian international iterations, and other World Allergy Organization IACI guidelines, helping to address this need. And it's a very rapidly growing area with respect to new treatments, and always important to keep these guidelines up to date. The most recent iteration was published back in the first iteration that was a guideline was published in 2014, and I was very fortunate to be part of that. Most recently in 2019, and letting people know that the next iteration, the next meeting is planned for September 2024, where we're going to bring together treaters from across Canada, international content experts who treat patients with HAE, as well as patient organizations in Canada, HAE Canada, AOH23, as well as Hereditary Angioedema International, or HAEI, to this important meeting to develop and update those guidelines. What about research? So research, what we're focusing on are a number of things in the committee. Susan Wasserman chairs this committee. There are ongoing projects looking at HAE in pregnancy, really trying to characterize that special population of HAE patients through a retrospective chart review. Also a genetics study that's being coordinated, looking at whole genome sequencing in patients, particularly HAE normal. Looking at developing HAE control tools and how they can be used to help guide us in the care of patients and adjusting treatments. Dr. Kanani is heading a study across Canada looking at comorbidities in HAE, trying to discern out which other conditions might go along in patients with HAE and we might need to pay special attention to. Dr. LaQuesta is doing some work looking at the impact of COVID-19 and vaccines with HAE. And one of the areas that we do fund through CHAEN is fellowship. And happy to say that CHAEN has awarded a fellowship to Natasha Correa, who's a resident here at the University of Toronto. She's going to re-engage in a national physician survey that was done a number of years ago, both through survey, but also interviewing treaters to understand what that approach to treatment amongst physicians who treat HAE patients looks like, if there are any care gaps that we might need to address, specifically when it comes to guidelines. And also, we continue to support interested residents who want to go down to the HAE Center in San Diego, where there are some very important and key researchers there, Dr. Bruce Zura, Dr. Mark Rydell, Dr. Sandra Christensen, and they can spend up to a month with them learning how they look after patients with HAE clinically, but also get an understanding of the research that's being done in that very important center. What about the laboratory committee? So this was a publication from a number of years ago from Xavier Charest-Morin, who was working with who was working in Quebec a number of years ago as a graduate student. And we are doing this once again. We're trying to understand what the diagnostic tests are available in Canada, who has access to those tests, and who doesn't, and how we might be able to bridge some of those gaps where there are tests that are not uniformly made available. As Charles alluded to as well, registries are very important, and we see them in other rare diseases, particularly hemophilia and cystic fibrosis. In HAE in Canada, we don't have a registry, and it's so important to move that forward. It allows us to capture an understanding of HAE in terms of diagnosis, delay in diagnosis, treatments that are being used, the efficacy of treatments, the impact on patients' lives, and quality of life. And so we're moving forward with this. I'm very happy to say there is funding in place to do this. Lumio is a vendor who's helping us develop this registry. All the policies are now in place with respect to steering committee, registry overview, data management, and publication. We are finalizing the data set, and that will be sent out very shortly, hopefully in the coming week or two, to stakeholders, including the patient organizations and other important stakeholders. Part of this, a new logo is being designed to reflect both CHAEN, but as well as CHAIR. That will be the acronym that the registry will be referred to. It'll be subtly different than this, but you'll see this change both in our CHAEN side of things as well as CHAIR. What we like to think we do, and hopefully we can do both with our directly, but especially with our patient organizations in collaboration, is to continue the ongoing advocacy. We know that once treatments are developed, once the clinical trials are done, we need to advocate for them to come to Canada. Even once they're licensed in Canada, we need to continue that advocacy to ensure that the benefits of those treatments are understood by the payers, and most importantly, that patients have access to those important new treatments. HAE is an area that has seen tremendous explosion in new treatments available for prophylaxis. Most recently, we are going to see other treatments coming down the line for acute therapies as well. And this ongoing advocacy with patient groups and with physician groups is so key to ensure that patients have access to those important therapies. And we also hope data collected in the registry will add that to that ability for advocacy in addition to an updated guideline. So with that, I say merci beaucoup. It's an honor to be asked to deliver this, and I wish everybody an enjoyable remainder of the meeting.